jump right back up again.
Yeah, that would have been good.
Okay, so we call the April 10th, 2018 City Council meeting to order. All council members present, Engineer Ryan, Attorney Rigg, Administrator Balsing, citizen comments. Does anyone have any comments on anything that is not already on the agenda?
I have a comment. There is a dark blue Honda out there, parked on the street, and as I was parking, I ran into it. Left a note on the windshield, so if that person is here, be aware that your rear bumper is a little bit mushed. How about that for a comment? That might be a first.
It might be a first of its type, yes.
Hopefully it's the last.
Yes, that was bill money you need.
Oh, left a note.
They're not going to get away. So, are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? A motion to adopt the agenda is printed.
So moved. Second. Or third.
Okay, John, motion, Richard, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda. Is there anything that should be removed from the consent agenda, or do we have a motion to accept it as yes?
Make the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. Consent agenda is approved. So we would move on then to item 6, presentations, public hearings, etc. And that would be our audit presentation. This topic.
For allowing me to come to the council meeting tonight. Prepared, which Mark is in control over his desk, but the entire council should have a paper copy as well if that's needed. But as we go, feel free to ask questions as we go, so that way I don't have to just stand here and talk for however long it takes me to get through this. So feel free to ask questions. There you go. Just real brief agenda. We'll go through the audit results. We have some required communications, which we'll go through real brief, and go through the financial results, and then also give you just a couple of items on the horizon for some new accounting standards as well. As far as the actual audit results go for the city for 2017's audit, the city received an unmodified or a clean audit opinion for 2017. That is the best thing you can do. You're also receiving an unmodified or a clean audit opinion related to the single audit. So this year we had to finish up the single audit, which is the audit of the federal awards that the city had. This is in relation to the fire hall construction that concluded during 2017. So we had the last piece of that we have to finish auditing this year. We had one significant deficiency this year as part of our audit. It is consistent with the prior year, and that is just a limited segregation of duties. Just inherent within the city, having a limited resources and limited staff here within City Hall, there is just a segregation of duties there. One item to note is other cities of comparable size, that's usually a material weakness for Kenyon, it's only a significant deficiency. So you are doing a pretty good job with as far as what you have for resources. We also do look at Minnesota legal compliance as well as part of our audit, which the state auditor's office requires us to do. And this year we did not have any findings related to legal compliance as well. As far as required communications, the entire council did receive an actual letter with all of these communications, so I'll just go over these real briefly. Just a reminder that the audit is reasonable, not absolute assurance on the financial results for the city. There are estimates involved in the audit. It could be the depreciation, the useful lives of capital assets, the streets, the pipes in the ground, the buildings that the city has. We had no material audit adjustments, so the information that we received from Sue here in and City Hall and the city offices were all in really good shape. We had one minor waived or past adjustment that we identified this year as part of our audit. And really that was just a timing of when a payable came in related to the prior year. It just wasn't recorded last year like it should have been. It was pretty minor, it was only about $8,800. And we also didn't have any disagreements with management as we did our audit process. If we did, the council would have known what it was. As far as the actual financial results go, this first slide we'll be looking at is actually the property tax revenues for the city. As you can see, between the general and the PFA levy that goes into the sewer fund, it is about $860,000 for the city. And your total property tax collections make up about 42% of your total governmental fund revenue. So it is a pretty significant portion. The city also does receive some tax increments as well. This is related to a tax increment financing district that the city has had in place now for several years. As you can see, it's very consistent year over year, as that is based on the value of the property within the district itself. As far as local government aid received by the city this year, the city did receive about $17,000 related to a small city assistance program. That's a statewide program for smaller municipalities. So between the local government aid and that small cities program this year, the city received about just under $547,000 of local government aids this year. For 2018, the local government aid is going to be about $544,000, just over that. But that also does not include any small city assistance that the city may receive if the state decides to provide some funding through that program as well. On this one, this just gives you a breakdown so you can see between your total property taxes and the state aids that the city receives. It is a pretty big, or it's a pretty significant portion of your total revenues when you look at all your general operating funds outside of the enterprise funds. It's this last year was just about $1.3 million between property taxes and state aids. This is looking at your governmental fund revenues. So this is your debt service, your general fund, your special revenue funds, your debt service fund. This is looking at all of those. You can see on here the purple and the blue columns there are related to your, or the purple and the teal I should say. Those are related to your property taxes in purple, and the teal is your local government aid. So you can see how much more significant those two columns are compared to your other revenue sources. But when you look at them from year to year, even though the columns vary each year a little bit, they're pretty consistent as far as where the revenue is coming from. Looking at the expenditure side, this is staying within the governmental funds as well. So this first one's looking at general government expenditures. So this is looking at items that are part of overall city operations. So it's the mayor, the council, the elections go through this department, administration, finance, legal fees go through here, planning and zoning, and municipal building. This year expenditures did increase slightly, about just over $9,000. And what it was a combination of some personnel costs. There was also some increases in janitorial services, but there was also a decrease in legal fees this past year, which helped offset some of those other increases. Looking at the public safety side, this is going to be a combination of the police being the blue portion on the bottom, fire is the red portion in the center, and then on the very top you can see there's this small green bar, which is just the first responders piece. As you can see this year, there was an increase in some of the costs on here. Really on the police side, it was just an increase in some personnel costs. On the fire side, there was some increases just related to some one-time expenditures to buying some additional items for the new fire hall as well. So there were some one-time costs in there. First responders are pretty consistent year over year. Looking at the public safety expenditures here in a little bit more detail, comparing the revenues that are dedicated to funding those operations compared to the expenditures. As you can see, police itself, you can see a pretty wide margin there between the expenditures and the revenues. What that basically tells you is the majority of the police department support comes from local government aid and property taxes. That's very typical. the fines, the forfeits, and a little bit of aid that come in relation to the police is pretty minor. So it's just more support from taxes and the governmental aids. Fire, on the other hand, you can see that the margin between the expenditures and the revenues, it's a little bit closer because there are some additional revenues that the fire department is able to receive. It's fire contracts with other municipalities, it's fire suppression, and then there's some additional state aids that go to the fire department as well, so that's a little bit closer as well. And then as well, there's also the first responders on there, which are for the most part operating pretty close to break even, plus or minus just a little bit each year. Looking at public works, so this is going to be everything related to salaries, benefits, repairs, maintenance, fuel, everything that takes to operate the public works site for the city. So that's anything related to streets, lights, anything related to those. So you can see here, this year total expenditures, there was an increase of a little over $11,000 this year. And really what that is some additional street maintenance was done during 2007 compared to 2016. You can see there was a larger spike back in 2013, but that was really just related to the old high school project. So that's pretty much done by now. As you can see, it's just rolling through your general operations. Sanitation and recycling is our next graph here. Really what this is just representing, the cost is the contract to an outside provider to provide the disposal services itself. So the expenditures and revenues here for the most part are going to be fairly close to even each year. This year there was a little bit of a difference between the expenditures and the revenues, about just under $2,000. A lot of that is just timing of when invoices come in and out for some of those operations. Looking at the culture and recreation side, so this is where we're looking at the programs for the parks, the swimming pool, the library, and the Gunderson House. This year, total expenditures were just over $290,000 when we looked at all of those various areas combined, those 5 areas. And when you look at those 5 areas in total, they increased a little over $13,000. And really a lot of it was just related to just increases in personnel costs. The parks, the library, and the pool all saw some increases in personnel costs. Looking at the library fund specifically or directly on this one, so the expenditures, so the blue column that's on the left side of each of those is going to be your expenditures. That's your salaries, your benefits, supplies, insurance, everything that you're needing to run the library. That's including purchasing books and periodicals, that type of stuff. The expenditures this year, there was just a real slight increase of about $2,300, and that was related to personnel costs. Looking on the right-hand side, the revenue side, as you can see this year, your revenues did increase or surpass your expenditures just a little bit. That does include the county aid of just under $40,000, as well as the property taxes that the library receives as well, which is just over $130,000. On this graph, we're looking at the economic development for the city, and this is really related to the EDA and some of the increased activity that's been flowing through that fund over the last year or so now, related to the Swellen property, also looking at the land held for resale for the industrial park, and lots of other things related to that. So just an increase in activity there over the last year. When we look at the total governmental fund expenditures in total now, this is looking at all of the different areas, looking at one graph. Outside of those few anomalies related to the increases in the Economic Development Authority, the timing of some one-time costs in the fire hall, getting some additional furnishings for that. But really the proportionality between the different functions, as we like to say, whether it's general government, public safety, public works, they stay fairly consistent year over year, which as an auditor, I like to look at that and say, you're not having to increase the support of any one function, and you're able to continue to maintain those same services without having to dramatically increase cost in any one of those departments. Looking at the general fund, the budget to actual this year, in total, the general fund was over budget by just under $51,000. And really, it's made up of several areas: general government, the municipal buildings, some general expenditures, and then some additional personnel costs that weren't in the budget. And then also related to public safety, that's bringing in some of the personnel costs, some of the furnishings for the fire hall, which are going through there, which weren't part of the budget as well. So those are your two bigger areas in that. And then looking at the actual library fund and the fire fund, their budget to actual, so we present those in the financial statements as well. As you can see this year, the library was under budget on the expenditures. That's on the right-hand side. It was under budget by about $4,500 this year. And then on the fire fund, you were over budget by about $11,000, but as I mentioned before, those are some one-time costs related to furnishing some items at the new fire hall, some additional supplies, and then that was offset by a decrease or not spending the full budget related to conferences and training this year, and then repairs and maintenance. Okay, our next graph is going to be looking at your general fund, looking at your fund balance as a percentage of what your operating expenditures are in this fund. So the far right-hand column is looking at based on your 2018 budget that the general fund had. And if the fund balance, if you basically broke even in there, your fund balance would be about 65% of your expenditures for the year. So you've got a healthy fund balance in the general fund, which is very good to see. As far as 2017, where you ended the year, you're basically at 66%. So very consistent there. You had a slight spend down from 2015 to 2017, but it looks like as of right now, the plan is to pretty much hold that pretty consistent now going forward. For the library fund for 2017, you see a slight increase here in our fund balance this year. The revenues exceeded expenditures by about $3,800, so you're just adding a little bit to your reserve in there. But as you can see over the past 6 years here now, 2016 was probably your lowest amount at about 30% of your expenditures, and your highest was back in 2013 at 38%. So you've been hovering right in that 30 to 40% range in there as well. For the fire fund, as you can see here, you had a slight spend down here. This was primarily related to the additional furnishings at the fire hall. So you can see you're down to about 34% there from 43. And really the big thing to note here is this is just the operations side of the fire fund. As you'll see later on another graph, the amount that's set aside in the capital projects is for some additional reserves. That's in a separate fund. So this is just the main operations of the fire department. This next one, we're looking at the Economic Development Authority. As you can see, this year there was a slight decline in the fund balance of about $5,100. That's including a transfer that was made this year of $81,000. And then also, that's also factored in the repayment of the advance from KMU this year. And there was just under $9,000 paid back on that advance this year as well. And this also is reflecting the purchase of just under $237,000 for the industrial park as well. When we look at the actual debt service for the city, as you can see here, I got two graphs that make this up, but this is basically breaking out each of the different debt issuances that the city has. As you can see, the ones on your left-hand side, all the way up until you get to about the last 3 or 4 columns on the right-hand side. As you can see, those are just slowly declining. Really what that's reflecting is just the payoff of those bonds over time according to the debt payment schedules. On the right-hand side, you'll see that spike, that's that teal color, the third one from the right-hand side, that was the temporary funding related to the fire hall. In 2017, that got essentially paid off by the 2 bonds on the right-hand side. One's a GO bond, the other is just a USDA note. So it just kind of refunded themselves. So the one will go away and you'll have the other 2 now, and you'll start to see that gradual spend down over time on those. When we look at the next graph here, this is a lot of the other miscellaneous debts and internal advances that the city has here. As you can see, For the most part, you're seeing a consistent spend down. The one oddball on this graph is the third one from the right-hand side. That's the net pension liability. This is something where you're going to see those swings up and down based on how the pension plan as a whole goes for the state of Minnesota. So the city's part of the Public Employee Retirement Plan, and that varies each year based on actuarial results and how their investments do. So you can see between 2016 and 2017, there was a pretty significant drop in the liability for the city. It's nothing that the city did or didn't do that caused those variations in there. It's going to be primarily as a result of the actual performance of the pension plan as a whole and how their investments fit. So that you're going to see those spikes up and down each year based on how the plan does. On this graph, we're looking at on the far left-hand side, we actually got 2017's actual debt service expenditures. And then going to the right, you can see the next 10 years worth of debt service expenditures. 2017, there was a large jump there because there was an additional, just about a $400,000 payment on the temporary bond that the city had for the fire hall because it was essentially unspent proceeds that the city had. It wasn't used in the construction of the bond, so it had to be paid back right away when the refunding took place here in 2017. But outside of that, once you start going across over the next 10 years, as you can see, there's some just kind of slight decreases in there. Really, that's just reflecting when bonds are rolling off and being funded. Looking at the capital projects fund, so what this is this is going to reflect fund balance that the city has set aside for various committed purposes. This year it was just under $724,000 in total, and it's a combination of fire, streets, general government, and then there's some other miscellaneous ones in there that make about $74,000. So as you can see, the city sets that aside for future projects and future commitments. So we like to show that and break it out and put it into a separate fund so you can clearly see what's being set aside for those projects. These next several graphs, we're actually going to be looking at the utility funds and the enterprise funds for the city. This first one, we're looking at the water fund. As you can see here on the far right-hand column of each of these ones, there's a teal-colored bar, which I know can be a little bit tough to see. That's showing that the water fund had net income this year, reflecting everything that we're required to take into account for our accounting standards that we have to follow for the city. The water fund still had a net income, which is very positive. And the operations also reflect an additional little over $3,400 related to the entries we have to do for the reporting of pension. Continuing to look at here at the water fund, we're looking at the cash reserves, which are the blue columns on each of these, versus the red one, which is the outstanding bonds payable. This year, your cash reserves were just over $500,000 in your water fund, compared to your bonds payable of $164,000. You've got sufficient cash there. You're able to continue to build that reserve up over time. When we look at the sewer fund, it's another one of those funds that is supported by the citizens and the users of the sewer system within the city. It does include a couple of non-operating things, which is a little bit unique. There's $103,000 of tax levy that goes into this fund related to the PFA bonds. So that's part of the funding process with the PFA. There's also some special assessment revenues that go into this fund of just over $13,000. And this year we did have a net income this year of just over $8,500 when you start looking at the factored in the pensions and that type of stuff. So you are fully covering the cost of the pensions and those types of things. As you can see here, when you look at this, you'll see that the blue side, which is your operating revenue, so that's your actual cash that's being generated as you send out your utility bills. And then on the middle column there, we have the red and the green stacked on top of each other. The red piece is your actual true operating cost. So it's your salaries, your supplies, your any repairs that you may have going through there, and then the green bar stacked on top of that is what your depreciation expense is. So as you can see, your operations here are not fully covering your depreciation, it's covering a portion of that. But when you factor in some of the other items, the special assessments, the tax levy, you still are having a net income in total after all of that in this fund. Then similar to the water fund, we looked at also looking at the cash reserves compared to what's outstanding for bonds and loans in this fund. As you can see this year, you're just over $1 million in cash reserves compared to about $1.9 million in bonds and loans in this fund. So it kind of reflects the infusion of the bonds and just recognizing some of the cash that's needed to run the sewer in municipalities, as that system continues to age, that just reflects some of the additional costs that are having to go into that to continue to maintain it and keep it up to the very standards that you're required to for the EPA and all of the keeping the state agencies. Looking at the electric fund here, this year, before we took in anything related to transfers or pension entries that we're required to do, the electric fund had a net income of essentially $246,000 this year. There was also some additional transfers of $65,000 this year. And there was also, when we looked at the pension effects of just about $9,000 on this fund, after all that was said and done, you still were able to have a net income of about $171,000 in this fund. So it's down a little bit from last year, but you're still having a positive net income in this one. What that's allowing you to do, if you look at the next slide, you can see here there's virtually no debt in the electric fund, just over $20,000 compared to what your cash reserves are. But as everybody on the council is probably fully aware, electric operations are pretty cost intensive when there are repairs that have to get done to the system. So nothing out of the ordinary that we're seeing as far as building excess cash or anything like that. It's something that you can kind of see with no bonds in there. Eventually, at some point in time, you're going to need those cash reserves to make improvements into the system as well. Looking at the liquor fund here now, and what you'll see on here is each year you can see how the operating revenues are compared to what the operating expenses are. But one of the things that's important to note on here is, so this year you're still reflecting a positive net income. This year you have $30,000 of income before transfers out. So what that means is the city is able to transfer money out of the liquor operation, which is really, in a municipal setting, that is the goal of running liquor operations, is to be able to supplement, whether it's tax levy or to supplement capital projects, whatever the council's decision is able to do. You're able to continue to make those transfers. As you can see, outside of 2013 and 14, over the last 7 years now, the city's been able to continually transfer $20,000 to $25,000 a year out of the liquor operations, which is very positive. Another item that we'd like to look at is just to see how the city is maintaining its gross profit percentage in the liquor operations. This gets a little bit skewed. I do include the state average on here as far as outstate municipalities with both on sale and off sale. The only reason I see that gets skewed a little bit is it really depends on what the breakdown is between on and off sales. The reports that are published at a statewide basis do not give a good breakout as far as how much is off sale, how much is on sale. So you're hanging right in that 34, 35, 36% gross profit. You're doing a pretty good job there. You're staying consistent. So that's what we like to see. You're not seeing that slip down. By maintaining that gross profit percentage, you're able to continue to have those profitable years, which allows you then to transfer those dollars out of the liquor.
The state average is 41%?
Yes.
So we're performing at below average.
You're below the state average, but as I mentioned, the hard part of that is the information that we get from the state related to that doesn't give us a good breakout of what on and off sale is. As far as how that breakout goes or how much is provided by each of these when we have all the state operations that have both. Typically your on sale is going to be a lot higher gross profit, just like on any bar. Off sale If you were a pure off-sale operation, statewide average there is about 25%. So that's the hard part, is the information we get from the state doesn't give us a good breakout on there. But in general, if you just want to look at it at face value, you are operating below what the state average is.
So our operation, the off-sale does better than the on-sale. And so how does that skew this?
By having the off-sale doing better than the on-sale, that's going to drive your gross profit percentage down. Because in general, off-sale only operates, typically the state average is about 25%, versus on-sale, the gross profit is going to be a lot higher. It's going to typically be pushing 45 to 50%. So by having a stronger, or having more business in the off-sale side, that's going to be what's happening there overall when you look at it in total, to drop down more than what the state average is.
Okay. Thank you.
This one, we also added this one in here. Basically, the liquor fund had some cash reserves, about $85,000 to $90,000 in cash reserves. The liquor fund, the one thing, since there is actually no true bonded debt in the liquor operations, we don't include that on here, but there is an advance that the liquor fund has related from KMU. It's still at just over $50,000, but this year the city, or the liquor fund, repaid over $12,000 on that advance. So you're continuing to make progress on that as well. So you're still being profitable in your liquor operations. You're maintaining some cash reserves in there, and you're continuing to repay that interfund loan that you have from KMU. Looking at stormwater, as you can see here, we had losses over the previous 2 years, but in 2017, with some of the rate increases that took effect on both the residential and the non-residential side, you were able to finally generate some net income in that fund. You're also covering depreciation, which is good. This has been historically in most municipalities I work with, whether it's small, large, metro, outstate, doesn't matter. Storm sewer is one of those funds that cities struggle with. It's really hard to fully understand and get a full grasp of what it costs to operate, and how do you then ultimately bill that back out to customers. So the fact that you've been able to turn around those losses that have happened over the last couple of years now and turn that into a positive net income, you've made some positive improvements in there. So it's very good to see that turn around this year. Similar to the other enterprise funds, so you can look at what your cash reserves are compared to your outstanding bonds. This year, you can see you have just over $500,000 in cash in the storm sewer fund, compared to about $100,000 in bonds this year. So you're sitting there with some good reserves there as well. One of those other things that's similar to other enterprise funds is projects and repairs within storm sewer is also a very expensive thing to undertake when those do happen. They're not quick $100,000, $500,000 type repairs. Typically, they're tens or not hundreds of thousands of dollars when those comes. It all depends on what the size is. As far as just giving you a real heads up on a few new accounting standards here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, mainly because basically the top 3 items don't really affect the city a whole lot. Statement 87, which isn't going to be out for another 3 years, out in 2020, that will have some effect on the city, but we still have plenty of time to prepare on that. Really, it's just going to change the way we do some of our lease accounting. The other ones in between there, the city doesn't have any post-employment benefits related to health care, so statements 74 and 75, no effect there. Asset retirement obligations, unless the city's hiding a nuclear reactor someplace, you're not really going to have any issues with that either. And then fiduciary activities, the city's not operating any type of fiduciary type activities throughout the city's general fund operations or anything like that, so you shouldn't have really any effect there as well. As far as just overall conclusion, general fund healthy. You have just over 8 months worth of fund balance here, which makes it a kind of healthy fund balance. You like to see that. Overall, your enterprise funds are profitable for the most part. Liquor, you have positive net income, you were able to transfer $20,000 out to other uses, plus you were able to repay your KMU advance this year. Very, very good there. This year, you also reflected the sale of the old fire hall, so that was about $89,000 of additional revenues this year. We're also reflecting this year in the financial statements the purchase of the industrial park land this year, which is $239,000. There was some additional spending related on the Bullis Street property. That was another $26,000 this year. And when we looked at everything in total this year, to get through all of the additional pension related stuff this year, that added an additional $20,000 of the overall expenses to the city's operations this year. Those are not actual cash going out the door. That is just additional expenses that are reflected to get the city in compliance with the standards that you're required to follow. So it's going to sway what the actual operations look like in the face of the financial statements because of that. So it amounted to about $20,000 this year. But outside of that, that's everything I had related to the audit this year. I'd be open to any questions or anything like that that anybody on that might have.
Richard, you must have something for him.
Yeah, I've got stuff, but it can hold.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Good job. Well, thank you.
Nicely done.
Yeah. So we can move on to engineering. Well, that production fund.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, since the City of Kenyon owns and operates public water supply wells, you're required to prepare a wellhead protection plan. And this goes on a 10-year cycle that you need to prepare those plans. The plan comes in two parts. Part one was actually prepared on behalf of the city by the Department of Health in 2016, and then the city is responsible for preparation of part two of the plan. And when we gave you the update last month, the status of that preparation was we had prepared a first draft of the plan and had a first meeting with the city administrator and the KMU superintendent to review the plan and go through and generate all the comments on that draft plan. Since then, we've had a second meeting, gone through the updated draft of the plan, made a few final comments to it, and now the plan is essentially considered approved at a staff level. And so that final plan then was put together and was sent to the city. So the city actually has two of these 3 reminders that contain the entire plan. One's on file in the administrator's office, the other one's on file in the KMU office. And there were also about a dozen of the plans put out on CDs as well. And then these were given to the city, and the city then was responsible to send these out to other affected local governmental agencies for review. And essentially that consists, for the city of Kenyon, that consists of Kenyon Township, the Zumgrove River watershed, and then Goodhue County, with both their board, the Soil and Water Conservation District, their planning and land use agencies. So that's now been sent out to those agencies for review. And we're right on track with the schedule we had shown you last month, where we intended to get the plan out for review on April 2nd, which it went out in the mail that day. So that triggered the 60-day review process. Those other governmental agencies now have until June 7th to return comments to us. In the meantime, KMU will be considering this plan at their meeting in May, and they will be making a recommendation of approval to the City Council. The Council has the jurisdiction to make the actual approval because the city is the one that is considered the owner of the wells. So KMU will make a recommendation in May, then we'll get those other comments from the other governmental agencies on June 7th, and then the city will hold a public hearing on June 12th in conjunction with your regular council meeting. And at that time, you'll receive any public comments. And then if everything's in order, you would approve the plan at a council level, and it would then get sent into the Department of Health. And the Department of Health goes through their final review process, which takes up to 90 days. And so then your plan, assuming everything goes according to the plan, would be approved by the Department of Health and would be on file in September of this year. and then that plan would be in effect then until September of 2028. Just a couple highlights of the plan. Really, part one is to identify the vulnerability of your system within the drinking water management area. And part one found that you have low vulnerability. Essentially, the thing you're most vulnerable to is any other wells in the area that could affect your wells. And there are about, I think it's 8 or 9 old private wells that may still need to be sealed. So those are considered potential threats or potential vulnerable that you need to be aware of and monitor and act on as you have the opportunities to do that. But then part two actually talks about the strategies that you'll take once you've understand your vulnerability, understand what potential contaminants are out there. What are your strategies to manage your system to minimize your risk to those? And the plan actually identifies 9 objectives, and they range everywhere from public education and public information to doing annual reviews of this plan and making sure you're on track with what this plan is guiding you to do. In support of those objectives, you actually have, I believe it's 32 best practice measures that your plan says you will undertake over the next 10 years. And some of those are as simple as getting copies of the informational brochure from the Department of Health on wells and putting it in your information rack by the front door, which we already have done. So we've already completed one of the measures that you're supposed to complete over the next 10 years. Probably the most interesting finding in going through the plan and the most interesting measure that needs to be completed is you may be aware the city had an old well number 2. It had wells 1 and 2. Well number 2 was abandoned, and then well number 3 was sunk, and so now you're operating wells 1 and 3, and well number 2 is out of service. While going through the research, it was discovered that well number 2 was never properly sealed. They attempted to seal it, but when the Department of Health dug through the record, they found it wasn't sealed correctly. So one of the findings now in your well protection plan is that sometime over the next 10 years, you'll undertake the activities to reseal that well and get it properly sealed. And there will be grant funding available for that. And so that's been set up in your action plan that you can apply for the funding, and when the funding is received, then you can go out and do the process of resealing that well and getting it signed off on by the Department of Health. So everything is in good order with your well protection plan. We're right on track schedule-wise. As I mentioned, the plan is complete, and both the administrator and the KMU superintendent have essentially approved it at a staff level for distribution to the other agencies. So now we're just in the process of waiting for the review period so that we can hold our public hearing and officially approve the plan at a council level. So I'd be glad to
Go ahead. I was going to ask, how do you know if there's a problem? And how does the plan deal with that? A problem such as, the suburb by 3M finding out that their water was contaminated.
Well, the city does do regular sampling and testing of the water.
Like monthly?
I'd have to verify. I don't know if it's monthly or quarterly.
Monthly.
And get a report annually.
Yeah, the consumer confidence report. Mm-hmm.
Lots can happen. You wait until people are getting sick or what?
Yeah, we test the water weekly.
Weekly? Okay, good.
Yeah, depends on what it is we're testing for. Right. But yeah, the water's tested very frequently at the person's homes. It's very strict on that.
And then in the plan, how do you deal with finding where it's being contaminated?
Well, it would depend if you have evidence that there is a contaminant. At that point, then you would have to locate the source and track it down. I mean, right now, we're finding that you don't currently have any contaminants, so there's no action that needs to be taken.
Okay, but a plan would have some idea of how you would take an action.
That would depend on what the contaminant was you found and what the source could be.
Correct.
There's 2 plans right now that we've been unfortunately required to kind of do at the same time in the last couple of years. The wellhead protection plan, which Joe will kind of talk that area that, you know, and we were found to be low vulnerability. And we have to try to identify any wells in the area of the wellhead protection plan that are old wells, that are, to make sure they're sealed, to make sure the state's got records of them. But the other plan that we're working on is the water supply plan. That's probably gonna get more into what if, you know, you have a contaminant. What are you doing to try to prevent it? How do you know, I think it's more in that plan than this one.
Yeah, all right.
I mean, there's a cost involved, obviously.
Yeah.
Plans are people do with water, but.
Okay, and this is specifically wells.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that Joe?
Wellhead protection, yep, identifying what they call a drinking water management service area, the DWISMA. Identifying essentially the area of influence is based on locations of your wells and how deep they are and where they're drawing water from. So they can identify the area of influence, and then within that area, what are the things you need to be looking for and so you're maximizing the protection of your wells. So looking for things, for example, there's a dumping station here at the power plant where there's actually fuel tanks. And so we have to make sure they have proper signage so they're not dumping anything that could get into the groundwater. And
Okay, and say there's a spill at one of the fuel tanks. That's relatively close to our well.
correct, but the fact though that your wells are several hundred feet deep
Yeah.
and are in an aquifer that has a confining layer above them, so anything that comes from the surface gets down essentially cannot get into the aquifer where you're drawing your drinking water from, because there is that confining layer of rock above your aquifer.
Except for well number 2, which wasn't sealed properly.
Correct. It's been filled with grout. It just needs to be drilled out and resealed with grout.
Okay.
I mean, but to be honest, if somebody wanted to, you know, sure, you know,
Yes,
there's a way to do everything if somebody really wants to.
Yes, you can't possibly.
Correct, but this is the, you know, you're meeting the requirements of the Department of Health for identifying the service area of your wells, identifying the potential sources within that service area, and then identifying how to protect your wellhead.
Yeah. Okay. We know that there's 9 wells, and we'd have to check those if there was a problem.
And some of them are on private property and are all private wells, and so you don't have the authority to go in and seal that well. It's more the kind of thing with knowing where they are, knowing who the owner of that well is, and communicating with them. And when they're ready and they say, oh yeah, we didn't even know we had this old well, we would like to seal it, helping them through that process so they can get those wells properly sealed, and we can cross them off the list if that's one.
And are any of them still being used, or these are just old abandoned wells?
Now, our understanding is they're old abandoned wells.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're not currently in use.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
There's really no action required by the council tonight other than to just hang tight until we have our public hearing in June. Yep. And this full copy of the plan is on file in the administrator's office if any of you would like to look at it. And the electronic version is available on the CD as well, so you can review it electronically.
And are the CDs for sale? So we could count on lots of revenue.
$485.
Yes.
Just don't forget, call before midnight tonight.
It's free, huh?
Amazon.com, we're hoping to crack the top million on.
We go online and
Let's move on.
Let's move along, yes. So, the engineering assessment work related to a possible reconstruction of Red Wing Avenue between 2nd and 10th Street.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had actually prepared a memo for the council packet, but I didn't see it in the packet, so I just quick ran some copies while we were doing the audit, and I'll send that around. There should be enough for the staff and council and for Holly. While it's going around, just in general, we had a work session last Wednesday, and we talked about Red Wing Avenue, especially from 2nd Street. Yeah, it's two-sided, front and back. We had a work session to talk about Red Wing Avenue and the possibility of doing an investigation to develop a project similar to what we did for the First Street project a couple of years ago, where you went through the 429 process to identify your improvements, estimate their cost, develop proposed assessments, and go through that whole process then to actually develop and construct that project. So we talked a lot about the existing conditions, and we talked about investigation that we need to do to identify issues and what the scope of the project might be. And then we also talked about timing of the project and financing and funding of the project. And long story short, from the city's perspective, with the current debt structure, with some other debt you have, it would be better financially for the city if the main cost of constructing this project occurred in 2020 rather than 2019. So that is kind of the target, is to, if you want to get a project ready for Red Wing Avenue, would be to target construction in the 2020 construction season. There are a number of activities that we need to do to collect data on the project so that we can start to get the project properly scoped and get a handle on all the issues before we actually get into the actual guts of developing the report and the plan. And we discussed those last week, and we essentially prioritized those, which ones that you felt were better to get a jump on earlier, and those that could possibly wait until a little later in the process. And that's essentially what this memo was attempting to do, was kind of just document the discussion from last week. And so what we had heard from the council during the work session was the most high priority items to start investigating first along Red Wing Avenue would be to get sanitary sewer televised so you can document the condition of that sewer and know what we're dealing with for potential replacement of the sewers. Get out there and inspect all utility structures on the sanitary sewer and the storm sewer and the water mains so we can start to establish their condition and what improvements might need to be made. And also look at what segments might be missing right now. We identified a couple of properties that right now, one does not have sewer service, a couple of other ones that might be on shared sewer services. So try to investigate how we can fill in those gaps in the sewer system to serve those houses. Look at the stormwater management and look at ways we might be able to make the stormwater system, the storm sewer system, more effective and more efficient, and how we might manage that water better, especially when it gets down towards 8th Street. Obviously that would involve the Public Works Director and the Utility Superintendent have a lot of information. So getting together with them and going through their road plans and getting the information they have and starting to gather that data and put that into the puzzle as well as you start to figure out the issues and what issues are there and how best to approach them. And then we also talked about possibility of doing the wetland delineation on the area east of 8th Street, where the stormwater currently tries to flow now, and where most likely where we would want to discharge that stormwater if we were to improve that storm sewer system. And so we can get a handle on, is there a wetland out there? If there is, what type is it? What's the official boundary of that wetland? And so that we know that if we were to do a storm water improvement for storm sewer, what would be the requirements we'd have to deal with in regards to any wetland that might be out there. So those are the things that the council had felt would maybe the highest priority preliminary activities, and those are things that we could start essentially now, as soon as the snow is gone. So within the next month, and we could work on that at a pace over the summer. And if you look on the back side of the memo, it kind of lays out in big picture terms how we could get from that point to where we do a project in 2020. And so we'll essentially be doing these higher priority items over the spring and summer of 2018. And then once we get through those, if the council wants to continue working towards a project, we could do the topographic survey this fall and the soil borings this fall, get that information, and then we could actually do the feasibility report over next winter, and then you would hold a public hearing on the project next spring. If everything still looks good, you could order the actual plans at that time. We could get those plans ready over next summer and fall, and we'd go out for bids the following winter and be ready to construct the project when we get to the spring of 2020. So in rough terms, that's kind of a summary of the discussion that we heard from the council work session last week. So at this point, the decision would be for the council, if you agree with this and whenever you're ready, you could authorize staff to start with these preliminary activities, which would include getting the information ready to get quotes on the sewer televising. We'd bring down some of our staff to do the structure inspections. We'd meet with the city staff to start gathering information on the old plans and the sewer and water systems, and to start to get that data put together.
I guess as we talked last Wednesday, I think we're all in favor of starting now, so I'll make a motion that we direct staff, to get moving on this project.
I would agree, and I'll second that one.
Okay.
With the 5
Yes.
prioritized items identified in this memo? Okay.
And at that point, we reach a decision point. What do we do next and when?
Correct, yep.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. We move past that motion. Now,
Thank you, Council.
another project, smaller ones. Centennial Drive paving.
Yeah, Centennial Drive, we also talked about this at the work session last week. This is obviously the road right in front of the fire station. And at the time the fire station was being developed, it was discussed that Centennial Drive would be paved at some point, just for its benefit, and you know, now there's going to be getting more traffic from it. It's going to be the main entrance, the main route to and from the fire station.
That's the fire
Yep.
trucks, the firefighters' personal vehicles that they'll be responding in from a safety standpoint.
Yep. And so the Public Works Director had gotten a quote from Bituminous Materials Incorporated last fall for the purposes of having a number to put in the budget for 2018. And that quote is included in your packet, and they came up with a cost of just under $83,000 to pave Centennial Drive from the trunk highway into the corner of the road where the existing pavement ends now. So essentially it would be a very simple project. They wouldn't do a lot of improving, they wouldn't do a full reconstruct of the road bed. They would pretty much just grade the roadway, shape up the ditches so the stormwater flows a little bit better, and then they would pave the roadway. They would replace, I think, the one driveway culvert at the driveway to Foldcraft, and they would fix up a little bit of the storm sewer down at the west end of Centennial now, where there's the storm sewer needs a little repair. And so they had given a quote to the city last fall for budgeting purposes of $82,645. So I went back and looked at an estimate that I had put together back in early 2015 when we were starting to develop the fire station project. And the tonnage that I came up with for what it would take to pave that road, their quote and my quote are within about less than 10% apart. I mean, so they're very similar. So I'm comfortable with the scoping he did for the tonnage of blacktop he would need for the road. I had assumed that there may need to be the need for some gravel added to the roadway to create a crown or to do some grading. So I had put about $10,000 into my estimate for some gravel work before you paved it. That's not included in the quote that was submitted last fall. But when you take that out of my estimate was about $90,000. His estimate is about $83,000. So we're in the same ballpark. We're within about 10% of each other between our estimates. And I think where this gets into too, and the city attorney's here tonight, municipal contracting law, if we get over $100,000, that's where we have to go through the competitive bidding process, have to put together a plan of specification, have to put it out advertisement for bids. I think what we're seeing though is the quote that you received last fall shows that the estimated construction cost is well below $100,000. My quote that I had put together back in 2015, if we take the gravel work out of that, then my estimate is also well under $100,000. So based on the price range you're looking at, you would be fine, in my opinion, and the city attorney can concur, if you'd like, to do this through the quote process. Where you try and obtain 3 quotes for the work, and then you can go with the lowest quote for that work as long as the quotes come in under $100,000.
That is correct.
So at this point, I guess